So I
Great.
have Melissa right here, and she is an expert when it comes to short-term rentals, especially in the Portland area. And with that, I will let her introduce herself and what she does.
Great. Thank you. Yes. So my name is Melissa Wright. As you said, I started doing permits for short-term rentals in the city of Portland back in 2017. I had a friend that had a beautiful Victorian home in the Buckman neighborhood of Portland, and I was between jobs, and she called me up and said, I know you can do anything you put your mind to. I want you to create a plug and play Airbnb business for me. I was like, all right, I don't know anything about that, but I'm going to figure it out. So I got to do the, buying of the beds and the linens and the dishes and do the decorating and the working on the listing and all this sort of thing. And that was really fun. But then I realized that she was going to need a permit to operate her business. And she wanted to rent 5 bedrooms in her home. She has 7 bedrooms in this home. And
Wow.
she wanted to list 5 of them short term. And so she needed the type B permit. And back then, you would walk into the Bureau of Development Services. You would stand in line up to 4 hours before you would get called, and you could ask your one question, and they would give you your one answer, and you'd go home and do that. And then you could do it all over again when you figured out the next step. And so it was a really slow and painful process that I didn't feel like normal people could do. I could do it because I was getting paid to
Yeah.
go and sit at the city for 4 hours. But if anyone had any other a life, a job, anything else going
Yeah.
on, people wouldn't have the time to do that. So it just popped in my head that this is a service. Now that once I had it figured out and she had passed and been approved for her permitting, I thought, well, this is a service that I can provide for other homeowners so that they don't have to go through this pain of this process.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, when it comes to the process, how do you feel like, I know there's different types of permits and things of that nature, but how long does it usually take for someone who's wanting to rent out those 1 or 2 bedrooms that they have extra in the house, or just trying to get a better idea of like how long it takes?
Yeah, so there are the 2 types of permits, as you said, and they are totally different processes and different scenarios. They have the rules are kind of the same, but the processes are different for obtaining those permits. So the Type A permit allows you to rent up to 2 bedrooms in your home on a
Mhm.
short-term basis, and you can have up to 5 guests with that. And that permit is a home occupation permit, which is a temporary permit that needs to be renewed every 2 years. So the application is a couple of documents that you need to fill out and sign and submit to the city. Getting those documents together, you could probably fill it all out, and you need to have it notarized and do all those steps. It might take you a week
Mhm.
to just kind of figure out what you need to do and what needs to go in there. And then you would submit it to the city of Portland, and it used to be almost immediate that you would pay your fee and
Mhm.
the process would begin. Things are really gummed up at the city these days, and so it takes a lot longer for them to ask for your payment.
Mhm.
I always recommend people just be a squeaky wheel and say, "Hey, have you gotten to my application yet?" And because that always helps move things a little bit. But I would say anywhere between 2 weeks and a month
Wow.
for the city at this point to take your payment. And at that point, as soon as you pay the fee, you are issued an ASTR number.
Mhm.
And with the city of Portland has made an agreement with the booking platforms in 2019 that once you have that number, you can begin renting, even though you're not technically approved. You're in a
Mm.
pending process because they're taking so long to get to that approval. I have permits that are those Type A permits that are been in the pending for over a year. Um,
Wow.
So it's a good thing you're allowed to operate as soon as you get that ASTR number. Now they can come back and say you messed up on your application or you don't fit the bill in some way, and then you'd have to immediately stop.
Hmm.
Um, because you're in that pending phase, you're not approved. So
Yeah.
you need to, you need to make sure you watch your business model on that and make sure you're doing things right so you don't get denied. So yeah, lately it takes about a week to get all the paperwork together, and then once you submit it to the city, it can be 2 weeks, it can be a month before they intake that the payment, and then you're
Hmm.
issued an ASTR number, and then you can begin renting. Um, the type B permit is a land use review. It's permanently changing the use for the property.
Okay.
So it's quite a bigger process. Um, that what I mean by permanently changing the use, that is within, it's conditional. So as long as you stay within compliance, they can revoke that permit at any time. But as long as you're within compliance, you can operate that with that permit and that property. And if you sold the home, the next owner could operate under that permit because it's changing the designation of use for the property.
Okay.
Um, that process, it takes about 2 to 3 months to get all the paperwork together, to get all the elements gathered. And then once you submit it to the city of Portland, it takes about another 3 months for the approval process. So about six to 7 months,
Wow.
and you'll get your approval,
So just to make sure that I'm
hopefully.
hearing this right, there's really two types of permits when it comes to Portland. One is being type A, which is closer to like the 1 to 2 bedrooms, and then the other one being type B, which kind of goes over more of a land use and kind of changes the use of that property. And that can be inherited later down the line for the next owner. Is that about right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
And that type B permits allows you to rent up to 5 bedrooms max, and you can have two two people per bedroom.
Yeah.
So, and the way the city calculates the number of bedrooms available for use is they take the total number of legal sleeping spaces. So, not a den, not an office, not a closet, but a
Yeah.
legal sleeping space. Um, and subtracts one for the resident. So all short-term rentals have to have a resident living on site at the address of the short-term rental activity.
Hmm.
So they'll take the total number of bedrooms, subtract one for the resident, and the remaining up to 5 are available for short-term use.
Okay.
And
That makes sense.
that resident doesn't have to be the owner. The resident can be a long-term tenant. So you've got some flexibility there.
Yeah. When it comes to it, obviously, this is a big process to kind of go through. And do you feel like there's probably like three things you wish everyone would know, or one thing that you wish everyone would know when it comes to turning their house into an Airbnb or short-term rental?
Yeah, I think really keeping that awareness about the residency element, that someone needs to live there on site. I know there's a lot of confusion with duplexes where people feel because they own the whole property, the whole tax lot, they can live in one side of the duplex and then rent the other short term. Those duplexes each have their own address. So that's why I always make a point to say it's a permit per address and not per tax lot.
Okay.
So, so making sure that you understand where that resident has to be at the address in order to operate that short-term rental. Now, a lot of people will have an ADU, and that is wrapped into the address, the main address.
Hmm.
So sometimes people will have their resident live in the ADU and then rent out the main home, or vice versa. So that's the biggest thing that I see people come up against, is they think that they can just rent their whole house and not live there. But that's not the case. And, and people always ask, well, how will they know if I live there or not? And really, compliance comes down to your neighbors. So if your neighbors notice you have an Airbnb and they know that you don't live there, they can call the city and then the city will take action to find out what's really going on.
Okay. So when it comes to the city of Portland, a lot of it's just complaint driven from your neighbors. Is that right?
100%.
Okay.
So,
That's definitely interesting.
and it's always the friendliest neighbors are the ones that call you in. I don't know why, but it's time and time again, it's the nicest people that are saying something. So
That
beware.
that's good to know. When it comes to short-term rentals, especially for the type B, I feel like that's a much more complex series of processes and paperwork to go through. Is that something where it's more specific towards like investors, or do you feel like there's a like specific type of client that you work with that
Mhm.
does those type of permits?
Yeah, so the type B, because it is a land use review, it's
Mhm.
going to require things like a traffic impact study done by a certified traffic engineer. It requires architectural drawings of the home, floor plan, site plan, elevation drawings. All these elements start adding up, and you're basically spending up to $17,000, including the city of Portland fees, in order to just ask for
Mhm.
this permit. There's no guarantee they're going to say yes. So the people that are going for the type B permit need to be able to fork out $17,000 before they even submit, just to apply, and get all that paperwork together. So mostly these are going to be homes that are going to rent 4 and 5 bedrooms on a short-term basis. So if you're renting a 5 bedrooms, you're going to have a 6 bedroom home, because remember
Mhm.
you got to have one for the resident. There's a lot of the Portland craftsman homes, that maybe they built an ADU in the back or in the basement. So then they'll have the resident in that ADU space, and then they can rent all 5 bedrooms in the big house kind of scenario. Um, it's I don't see as many people going through the process that would only have like a 4 bedroom home, so which would allow them to rent only 3 bedrooms. Um, because you just I am not on the side of management or what people are going to earn. I don't know anything about that. That's not my area. But it does bump you up into another search category if you have 3+ bedrooms, because you have to have that type B permit. So those are the pluses and minuses that property owners would have to go through.
Okay. And with, I guess, the difference, obviously there's going to be a lot more difficulty getting that type B permit. How many would you say would be in the type A category versus the type B when it
Mhm.
comes to permits and just in general the population or the demographic when it comes to those rentals?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I have a general idea, but the city of Portland does have a registry, and
Mhm.
it's open to the public and anyone can look up these numbers. I believe currently there's 108 type B permits that are issued in the city of Portland, and there's maybe 2,000 type A's.
Wow.
So, yeah, so it's a big difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. And do you find like I'm a little curious about, especially the type A, are these people that are getting these permits more people who are just trying to get a little bit of additional income from it, or are they people who are basically wanting to do this for business purposes or building a business with short-term rentals?
Mostly I see that the real business of short-term rentals are going to be those type B permits. The type A permits are more people that just need extra income, or there are older people that want to age in place and their kids have left, and now they have empty rooms in their home, and having that supplemental income is a great thing. Um, there are definitely people that just love travelers and love to meet new people, and they just simply and they're really homeowners who live in the home and they just want to interact with travelers. That's certainly a portion with the type A permits. I don't really see that with the larger homes, but with the smaller homes, when people are just renting 1 and 2 bedrooms, a lot of people just love travelers and want to have live vicariously through people that are coming to stay in their home and stay in their city.
Yeah,
So, which is sweet.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And with this, you've obviously dove a lot into this, and you're an expert when it comes to the permitting side of things. What do you like most about being able to do this type of work?
I hate seeing people that want to create something and then come against bureaucratic roadblocks. I love entrepreneurship. I'm an entrepreneur. I love the empowerment of people to be able to create a resource for themselves. And so being able to make the path easy for those that want to create some extra income is what I love the most. I love being able to just take away the stress, the anxiety. So many times people will be worried that if they ask for one permit with the city, it's going to open Pandora's box. And now are they like, if I get an inspection, I don't know if my downstairs basement is inspected properly or was built to code. And so there's a lot of anxiety around, now am I opening Pandora's box with the city of Portland, and now am I going to have to rip out walls and redo all this stuff? So easing people's minds with that, and just even if they don't have those worries, just letting people know that the paperwork's going to be filled out exactly the way the city wants it. They're going to have everything they need. There's going to be no questions asked. Everything's going to be smooth. And I love relieving that anxiety in my clients.
Yep, that's definitely a good thing to do. And on that note, I'm a little curious about when it comes to having to do these permits, what are kind of roadblocks people see as roadblocks, but they're not actually roadblocks? For example, the inspection for the construction side of things, and what maybe might need to get ripped out or not.
So with the type A inspections, the inspector that comes out is only to look at the short-term rental bedrooms. So they are not to wander around the house. They're not to go in any of the spaces where the short-term rental bedrooms don't exist. Of course, they have to walk into the front door, and they have to probably walk through a living room or through another room to get to those short-term rental bedrooms. So if they see wires dangling out of the walls or something like that, they're going to have to report it.
Hmm.
Um, but they're not allowed to say go out into the backyard and look at your air conditioning unit. That doesn't have anything to do with that short-term rental permitting. So they're not going to look into the resident's bedroom. They're only checking those 2 short-term, or what, whatever you're applying for, short-term rental rooms. And they're checking to make sure that you have interconnected smoke detectors. So they'll test those, they'll push one, and then they all need to go off at the same time. They're checking to make sure they're in the right spot, that they're in each bedroom and then in the hallway. And then they're checking the egress with the windows, that the windows are built to code for the year that they were built, and that they're operational. So again, I've been into some of these old Portland homes with the sash windows, and if you have to put a stick in it to keep it open, it won't pass. So it needs to be an operable window, and even if it is an old window, as long as it's built to code for and it's operational, then you'll pass.
Okay. So it sounds like
Yeah.
they are not going to do a full inspection on the house, and they're just looking for very specific things in terms of the fire alarms and making sure that the egresses work for everyone and doesn't need to have a stick that basically goes in there.
Yes. Yes.
That's good to
Yes.
know.
And you can tell your inspector if they do start wandering around. You can be very vocal and say, this is not part of the short-term rental inspection, and they know it. So be empowered to advocate for yourself in those situations.
That makes sense. When it comes to the type A, do you have any like good stories that you have that was like really odd, or something that you were like, I'm not sure how this even got through? Or I'm a little curious about what type kind of like stories, whether they be great stories or maybe horror stories, to avoid Because sometimes there might be some people that went through the process and didn't do it properly since they didn't have your help.
Well, one inspection situation that was disappointing is the stairwell is not the right height. It was an old house and it was a basement that they were converting bedrooms into. And all the bedrooms were legal and the right size and all this and that. And the egress windows were all good, but the stairwell going down into the basement was not. And so major construction then had to happen if they wanted to move forward. So that was kind of like, I wouldn't have caught that. They didn't know, and it was disappointing that that it came to that. So it's good to, if you have any builders that know the codes, to, and there's any questions about an old house, to have it looked at. But for the most part, it's I do, the clients that I work with, I really try to do a lot of due diligence on their property before we start working together. I have a 100% success rate in getting the type B permits approved. I think it's the same with the type A's, but I'd have to double check. I've done a lot of those. And that is because I'm really picky about who I work with, and because I want them to pass. Them passing makes me look good. It's a mutual thing. So I look at the property. I want to make sure that they have, if they're in a really dense, like downtown area, what's their parking situation? Making sure that the rooms that they say are legal sleeping spaces are actually legal sleeping spaces. I have a great architect colleague that I refer to those types of questions to, as far as dimensions and things. But I really just, and then I look around to see how many other short-term rentals are in the surrounding area. It doesn't weigh too heavily with the city, but if it's a type B, they might consider the density of short-term rentals. So I just kind of like to prepare myself for anything that might come up and then talk those through with the client before we get started.
That makes sense. And when it comes to the parking, I'm actually a little curious about that. Is Portland pretty strict on parking when it comes to short-term rentals?
So for the type A, they don't have really any issues with that. It's, you're just renting out up to 2 bedrooms, so there's not a lot of impact for parking with that. But with the type B, they really like to see at least one off-street parking space for the resident, for that person that's living there. It's going to change neighborhood by neighborhood. I had someone that lived in, I guess it's Nob Hill, Northwest 23rd area. And, it's all meter parking or permit parking down there. So because he did have an off-street space for himself, he was a homeowner, but the city asked for his guest, he had to provide TriMet passes. He had to have 4 bicycles on site for guests to use. He had to have like a whole parking mitigation plan, and then report that back to PBOT. PBOT, all the city agencies will weigh in on the decision, and PBOT is a Portland Bureau of Transportation, will weigh in pretty heavily on that parking, and that's why you need to have that traffic impact study.
Hmm.
Will show how many cars are coming and going, and what the impact will be with more people coming to stay as guests. So
Okay,
it depends. If you're out in the Cully neighborhood where there's just parking galore and you only had one off-street parking, it's that nobody's going to care because there's spaces available. It's not so dense. But if you're downtown, you're going to have to come up with a mitigation plan.
okay, so it kind of sounds like each scenario or each kind of potential has a lot of different combinations or a lot of different requirements that could or could not be required for certain short-term rentals.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sometimes the planners will require the homeowner to put a higher fence up so that there's a larger buffer between them and their neighbors. Sometimes The city, I mean, the neighborhood association, sorry, the neighborhood association can weigh in very heavily. The Irvington Neighborhood Association really is very active and doesn't want a lot of short-term rentals in their neighborhood. So they're very active and vocal with the city against anyone that they don't think should be there. So, but then other neighborhoods, they don't even have a neighborhood association. So it is very varied in which part of Portland you are wanting to rent your home.
Okay. Is there any construction things that, like common things that tend to pop up when it comes to considering or having the city ask for these certain improvements?
Um, like with the fence, you're thinking?
Yeah, with a fence, I just feel like I'm not sure if there's like top things that you just see, or is it just all over the place all over the time?
It's as varied as the home and as the neighborhood. So there is a point in the application process. Both the type A and the type B get a neighborhood notice that gets sent out to all the surrounding neighbors.
Mhm.
Um, and with that notice, there's a number and an email that those neighbors can call and um, and express their concerns. So a lot of times that's when the planners or whoever is reviewing the application will then start to make some adjustments. Like if the neighbors are saying, hey, this guy only has a chain link fence between his house and my house, and now you're going to have guests hanging out in the backyard, strangers hanging out in the backyard. I need something more than a chain link fence. The planner can then say you need to put a wood fence in. So at that time, but that would only be triggered if a neighbor used that phone number or that email and said something about it.
Okay, that makes sense. And for that time frame, how long do neighbors have to put in their input for the application process?
They have 30 days.
Okay.
So yeah, they got to get on it.
Well, that's good to know. And then when it comes to just the short-term rental forecast in the future, I'm just a little curious about where you feel like the city's going, along with kind of what you would maybe expect or maybe be prepared for in the future.
So the city knows that its permitting process is not good. So they're well aware of it. And they have contracted with an outside company to create an entire permitting platform. I believe Hood River did something very similar, where permitting for short-term rentals will be on an entirely different website, and everything will be done, all the database, all the information, everything you need in order to get that type A permit will be hosted on a website that's not City of Portland. So it'll have its own place that it lives. It'll have its, everything will be much more streamlined. And they, they say maybe that'll be up and running in a year, add another year to it. So
Yeah.
we got 2 years down the line before we see a new permitting process in Portland. Um, and so during up until that time, it'll still be the same paperwork and the same process and the same registration. But eventually they are wanting to streamline it. The fees that are paid for, like the application fees and anything related to the permitting for City of Portland, doesn't even cover the cost to employ City of Portland employees to process the permits.
Okay.
Like the fees don't cover what the City of Portland has to spend in order to build this platform. Or so the money issue is hard for City of Portland because it is a really small part of the population that's doing this business. Um, so creating funding for it is just not going to happen. So they really kind of are doing the whole thing on a shoestring.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I guess
Yeah.
with the fees, I guess I'm a little curious about how much does it cost to do a type A and a type B permit when it comes to
Mhm.
processing everything and all the fees associated with them?
Yeah, so the type A permit is right now, I think it's $179. It's been fluctuating a lot in the last 2 years, so that's why I'm vague about it. It could change tomorrow. I don't know why it has been fluctuating, but it's at 179 right now to apply for the type A ASTR permit. You also need to get register for transient lodging tax and get a Portland business registry number. Those things are free. You have to pay the taxes, obviously, but the registration is free. So not too huge for that type A permit. The type B permit, it's currently just under $8,000 for the city of Portland fee. And then you'll need to do the traffic impact study. That is going to run about $4,000. And then you'll have to get architectural drawings. That'll run you about $1,000. And then if you should choose to hire my services, then I have my fee too. So you're looking at around $17,000 for that type B permit
Yeah, but I'm
if
sure
you
that
hire my
having
services.
yeah, well, having your services could probably potentially save you a lot of money, especially if you're doing a lot of the due diligence with the type B permits, because those require so much more work and a lot more understanding of all the rules and regulations to make sure that it actually is feasible. So that's one of those where I personally like having the ability to have someone check and review it who's an expert, and it's just always good to have that so that way you are really assured before you start doing the traffic study and all of that stuff really moving forward. So something where it's
Yeah,
like similar to
I
inspections. You want to do inspections. Yes, it does cost you, but it could potentially save you a ton of money and time later down the road.
I did have someone that chose not to hire me and go the type do the type B on his own, and he paid to have everything set up and got his application in, and then found out that one of his rooms that he thought was a legal sleeping space was not, and there was no way to convert it, and so he lost all that money.
Oh, that's not good.
Yeah. So, and that would have been a very, like, before we even started, I would have saved him that money.
Yeah.
I would have told him, we would have looked at that in the beginning. So he lost that 10 grand plus, just because he was not aware of certain rules
Yeah.
that the
And when
city
it
has in
actually
place.
comes, sorry, say that again.
And that he wasn't aware of certain rules that the city had in place.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And when it comes to like short-term rentals, that's usually any stay that's lower than 30 days. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. So if you're renting over 30 days, now you don't need a short-term rental permit. So if as long as you're over 30, now you should be aware of the City of Portland's landlord tenant laws. Um, there is a little window between 30 days and I'm pretty sure it's 47 days, where the city still recognizes that that is like a vacation rental. And so you have a little bit of leeway there as a long-term landlord-tenant law situation. But it's a good thing, especially if you're not, if it's not homeowner occupied, it's a good thing to be aware of what those long-term tenancy rules are.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess kind of shifting gears a little bit more towards just like or shifting back to the future of short-term rentals. I know that laws have kind of been passed where it's become a little bit more and more stringent, especially with Portland. I know that they are probably one of the more strict cities out of anywhere in Oregon, from what I understand. Do you see that continuing forward where they become a little bit more strict over time? Or I guess I'm a little curious about any new regulation or things that you would be expecting later down the line.
I don't see them adding any new rules to what already is existing. So I think everything will stay the same as far as requiring someone lives on site, the number of bedrooms, and the number of guests, and um, the things that are in place currently, I don't see those changing. Um, the city is doing more to make sure the platforms are removing any listings that aren't registered. But I don't see them changing the rules or minimizing the anything from what it is at this standard place right now.
Okay. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
I just know that definitely in like some coastal cities, things of that nature, where they are very strict and it seems like they're only getting more strict. So that's good to know that Portland has kind of hit a baseline in a sense where we're not really increasing the amount of legislation or rules or regulations when it comes to short-term rentals.
I feel like the because the percentage, and I can't remember off the top of my head how many short-term rentals are in the city of Portland, but it's under 2%. And the way most bureaucracies work is they're not going to really make any huge changes or address things until it's at least 5% of the population. So if there was some massive explosion where short-term rentals became over 5% of the housing stock, then you might see some major changes. But with us it being such a small part of the housing stock currently, I know there's always so much talk about it's a big deal, but when you really look at the numbers, it's not. So I can't see there being any massive changes where like the coastal destinations like you're talking about, they might see 25% of their housing stock is vacation rentals. So the disparity is much larger there. But Portland being such a large city, I just don't think that they'll get to that percentage anytime soon.
When it comes to, so you're saying that there is not a huge amount of Airbnbs that are sucking up all of the inventory when it comes to Portland specifically. Am I reading
Yes.
that right?
Yes, even though that's contrary to what everybody seems to put on the blast the media with, if you look at the numbers, it's not. So it's maybe more than residents would like. Maybe they would like to see it at zero. But it's not 25% of the housing market it's not even over 2%.
Wow. Where do people think that that's an issue? Or I guess I was always curious about why people thought it was going to be something that wiped out existing housing or, I don't know, transformed it a lot.
Yeah, Airbnb being it's not so much now, but I think the concept started when Airbnb came on the scene, and it was so new and not we didn't have that type of business yet. We didn't have Uber. We didn't have, these kind of businesses. So no one really understood what it was. And I think that just when what I always say is confusion means no. If someone's confused, they're just going to say no. It's just easier to just be like, So I think a lot of it just came out of confusion of the business model of Airbnb. And there I there are a reason why there are zonings like residential zones and commercial zones, and I think those are smart for the city planners to see that and to have um, different rules for your residential zones and your commercial zones, and the allowances that they're making for people to have commercial activity in a residential zone, which is essentially what's happening with Airbnbs. I think it's fair to monitor that because it's a commercial activity. So, and I think it's fair for people to be worried about commercial activities in a residential zone. Um, so, we don't want things going crazy.
That makes sense.
I'm all for people using their property as they see fit. And like I said, I love entrepreneurship, but there has to be a balance, of course.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And then I guess if someone was starting to do this short-term rental thing, what would be like, you would say the first three steps they need to do in order to get that type A permit?
Yeah, so making sure that their bedrooms are legal sleeping spaces would be probably the first thing. And then making sure that they have a resident there. The way that the city asks for proof of residency is through providing an Oregon driver's license of that property address. So they don't take an electric bill or utility bill or anything else. It's only the driver's license. And so a lot of people will have everything ready to go, but maybe they just haven't updated their driver's license with the DMV, and so that can slow things. The city won't take a temporary license. It has to be a photograph of the actual driver's license, and it has to be in color. They're actually particular about that. So making sure you have a driver's license that matches the property address, making sure you have legal sleeping spaces, and understanding what the parameters are for what you're applying for. If you're applying for a type A permit, know that you can't have more than 5 guests, and know that you can't have more than 2 bedrooms short term. So that, as long as you stay within those rules, the there's a neighborhood notice form that goes out that's part of the type A application. And on that neighborhood notice form, the second page has a really great summary of everything that the city wants from you, what their compliance rules are. So they have attached that to that form, so it's easy to find.
Okay, makes
So
sense.
those would be the things, just making sure that you are applying for what you think you're applying for.
Makes sense. And is there anything else before we wrap up the interview that you would like to tell people, or anything else that you wanted to get across?
Um, I'm always open to answering questions. I'm a very like word of mouth. We were talking before we started recording that I'm not big into marketing, but I love talking to people and I love helping people. So I'm always open to having someone just call me or shoot me a message and say, do I have this right? Or what do I do? Or where do I find the forms? That never bothers me to answer a million questions like that, because like I said earlier, I hate when people are confused and intimidated by the process. So I like to make myself available for that. And just make sure you get your permit and get everything dialed in, so you don't get a cease and desist later and then have to scramble. I want to see people succeed. I want to see people thrive. So just get the paperwork done and call me if you need help.
That's awesome. And how can people contact you?
My website is strpermit.com. So STR short term rental permit.com. And I have on my, you can click the connect button and I have a calendar on there of my availability. You can just schedule yourself in a 20-minute conversation with me and we can talk about your property. You can email me there. And my phone number is listed. So strpermit.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Melissa, for having this conversation with me. And I'm sure that there are a ton of nuggets in here that people will enjoy. And we will talk to you later.
Thank you so much for having me.